All clear.
My name is Alex Mercer. I'm the reason for all of this. They call me a killer, a monster, a terrorist. I'm all of these things.
Ripping, tearing, blood and gore, hyper-violence in a broken world where everyone gets punished for their sins, regardless if they're good, bad, or neither. A hero that destroys everything, and villains that attempt to save everyone. These are the things that define Prototype. It's unapologetic in its raw brutality, indiscriminate violence, and extreme level of edge. But it's so much more. It's also the best God Among Men simulator ever. It's the best look at what would happen if a superpowered hero existed in real life, and one day he just went slightly mad. It's a game so completely unique, it hasn't been eclipsed neither by its sequel, nor by any other games before or after. It's a leftover from an entirely different era and time, where developers could truly experiment with various ideas and games could be truly special and interesting instead of being just endless remakes of already existing franchises or watered-down tasteless attempts to cash in on modern, sensitive, and easily offended masses. So let's see what this by now almost antique relic of a game is all about. The hero of this story is Alex Mercer, which is the most ironic name ever, for he has absolutely no mercy for anyone except one person. He's a walking, breathing weapon of mass destruction, extremely effective and incredibly brutal, but he doesn't know it. Not yet. He has no memory of who he is. He doesn't know what he can do, doesn't have a clue why everyone is trying to kill him. He will find out, but now it's time to destroy. We start in the middle of chaos, a carnival of gore, and we get a taste of Alex Mercer's power. He's strong, really strong. He can punch the blood out of your body with just a single strike. It's awesome, but let's get even more awesome. Let's give Alex super hardcore claws. He's like the best version of Wolverine, slashing and ripping through enemies like butter, and every slash is extremely satisfying and juicy. At this point, regular enemies can't stand in your way, but let's get stronger. Hammer fists are Hulk's wet dream. Every punch is powerful. Every attack can be charged for even more power. Tanks are your punching bags. No armor can stop you now. But hammer fists are slow, so we get to try the final weapon, the blade. Stronger than claws, faster than hammer fist, with absolutely devastating airdrop attack. It's glorious. But this glory doesn't last. We barely get to defeat a few enemies, and then bam, with a single devastator, enemies lose their lives, and we lose our powers. No matter, we'll get them back in time. But now it's time to run. Run and fight for your life. Alex is like a shark. Movement means life, stopping means death. Which is why running feels amazing. Even at the start of the game, where you're slowest and weakest, running is still incredible. Alex moves fast and jumps high, but every turn is slow and every move feels really heavy. And that's because Alex is really heavy himself. He's an amalgam of biomass containing within himself endless bodies and memories of his victims. That makes him really heavy, but at the same time it makes every move feel powerful. Every step leaves a crack in the concrete. Every jump is followed by a crash landing. And very quickly you get to experience that heavy power yourself. You're given a free shot on an enemy helicopter, and all you have to do is throw a car. And here we get one of the biggest problems with the entire game. Barely 10 or so minutes in, the targeting system, 20% of the time, it works every time. It works now because target is not moving and because it's a tutorial. Don't expect it to ever work as good as this ever again. It does happen, just don't expect it, so you won't have to be disappointed. But no matter, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Now, helicopter is destroyed, and we get to experience wall run. It's great. Alex can run up the walls faster than Spider-Man in most games, and you can jump to ascend even faster. It feels cool as hell, but let's get higher. I messed up here, and instead of jumping across, I dropped down into the street with a small explosion. Doesn't matter, because it still feels awesome. Even your mass is a weapon on its own, so it's satisfying every time you see it. Anyway, let's get to the top of this building. Wall-run is awesome. It feels seriously cool to do it. At the top, a couple of helicopters wait to be destroyed.
Now I gotta kill them too.
Welcome to the second biggest problem of the game, bad damage detection. It's especially easy to notice here. When you throw something, it might damage the enemy, or it might not do anything at all. It depends on something, but it's not clear on what. Sometimes you can throw something and hit target dead on, and it won't do anything. Sometimes, barely hitting the target at all will completely destroy it. Later in the game it's not as big of a problem because of upgrades, but early game it's really annoying. Anyway, helicopters are gone now, so we are introduced to the most important mechanic in the game, consumption. You can consume basically any living thing, restoring your health, taking on their memories if they are targets of interest, or taking over their bodies if they are human. This turns you into the ultimate stealth predator in a game where stealth is extremely optional, which means you will only use it when the game forces you to. In every other situation, consumption is just health regen. But let's continue.
My sister. He knew where she is. I know where she is. I need to find her. Dana.
We receive a mission to infiltrate the home of Dana, Alex's sister. To accomplish this mission, we need a military disguise. It just so happens that the enemy we just absorbed is the perfect fit for the mission, so we don't even have to waste any time looking for another target.
They know I'm coming. I have to think about this.
We can just go right to the objective. We get a tutorial on stealth, then some exposition in a cutscene, and we're done. That's the first 15 or so minutes of the game done. What an incredible intro, starting from almost the peak of Alex's power. That level of power is emphasized even more by the game immediately taking away almost all the powers and making Alex barely superhuman. Almost all key mechanics are introduced in this 15-minute window, with almost no wasted motion. And most importantly, throughout this entire ordeal, Alex feels powerful. Even when he's weak, he still exudes chaos and brutality. These first 15 minutes or so are extremely impressive and give you just the taste of things to come in the following hours. A truly excellent intro. Chaos and action die down quite a bit after that. Like half the rest of the game from now on is Alex trying to get to that peak point at the start. Every mission done, every goal reached, every life taken just brings you closer to that goal. At the start everything is slow. The game eases you into the chaos. From the start, there are basically no infected in the city. Military doesn't shoot you on sight. Alex himself moves slower and is weaker. Most of the powers are locked until second part of the game. Running is slow and jumping is pretty weak. But the entire city is open right away, and you are free to do whatever you want. Whether you feel like familiarizing yourself with the layout, or you just want to gather collectibles for tips, hints, and a decent point bonus, you are free to do that. This is the most relaxed state the city will ever be in until after the final mission. And here we encounter the third biggest problem of Prototype. It's ugly. As soon as you spend more than 0 seconds looking at something, you immediately notice how ugly everything is. City is big, but almost entirely empty. Aside from infected and military bases and few landmarks, almost all buildings are extremely boring and lifeless. Same goes for crowds. There's maybe 30 or 40 different skins that NPC can have, and not only are those skins really low resolution and extremely boring, they also repeat very often because NPC generator code isn't random enough. So you can easily see multiple of the same NPCs in one area at the same time. Same with cars. You can easily see multiples of the exact same car standing at every intersection, often either just color switched or entirely the same. It's even worse for army. There are only like 4 or 5 different military skins. And sure, it's military, all of them look similar, but in this game, most of them look exactly the same. Same goes for enemies. Ground textures are almost entirely featureless, with no details whatsoever, with the exception for occasional rock. And this game came out in 2009, the same year as Assassin's Creed 2, Uncharted 2, and Halo 3. ODST, and almost 2 full years after Crisis. It's pretty clear that a lot of sacrifices had to be made to create an open world of such scale. But graphics don't create gameplay. Prototype is only ugly if you're still. It's only an eyesore if you're standing around, not doing anything. When you're in the middle of action, the gameplay is gripping enough and action is so intense, the graphics don't matter. You don't care about blank textures, repeating vehicles, and boring buildings when there's an explosion every few seconds on the screen. You're running either at or from the enemy, and there's hunters hot on your trail. All soldiers and most of NPCs looking the same doesn't matter when their only purpose is to be meat for the grinder and health for Alex. One upgrade we can make already is the shield power. It's one of two ways Alex can defend himself from damage, the other being full body armor you unlock later in the game. But shield is quite often better. Full body armor reduces your movement speed significantly, and in a game where movement is life, that's a massive penalty. Shield still allows you to move as fast as ever, while still providing a partial protection from damage. And it can also be used to hit people while running, knocking them up in a way like bowling pins, which is always fun. Along with that, we can get glide and dash. Glide allows Alex to extend the jump distances by gliding in the air, and is easily one of the most useful abilities in the game. But glide only lasts for a few seconds before Alex starts descending. That's where air dash comes into play. It resets Alex's glide position to its peak, allowing you to chain two glides together without touching the ground, greatly extending distance covered in flight. But dash can also be used to suddenly change the direction of movement, either to cut a corner or avoid an attack. With later upgrades, you can both add another dash and increase the dash distance, making it a key part of any air-related movement. With 2 dashes, you can even scale buildings extremely quickly, even faster than by just running or jumping up. So dash is great. But the most important part is that both dash and glide are very easy to perform, easy to get used to, and both offer extreme improvement to Alex's mobility, so they're used literally all the time. But this brings us neatly to Prototype's fourth biggest problem. It's incredibly imprecise. For a game that's heavily focused on movement, the impossibility to do even slightly precise movements is infuriating. For example, there's a building near Times Square with a spire on top of it, and on top of that spire is a collectible. Collectibles provide quite a bit of points, so it's natural to want to get it. However, because of incredibly infuriating geometry, reaching the top is almost impossible. Running up the spire does nothing, as Alex will just slip off of it and fly into the distance. You can't glide to it since glide only loses height, and there aren't any buildings nearby tall enough to allow Alex to just glide down to the collectible, and jumping up doesn't help either. You can't even simply climb onto the spire because the geometry of the spire is all screwed up, and in most cases Alex can't even grab it, and when he can, he just swings around and loses grip anyway. The only, and I mean only, reliable way to get the collectible is later in the game when you have double dash. That way you can extend the distance covered in the air and can reach the collectible while mostly avoiding the dumb geometry in its entirety, and it's incredibly infuriating. You can't reach what you want, not because there's an invisible wall there, or because the area is inaccessible, or some other reason. You can't reach it because of this building's particular geometry and movement's incredible inaccuracy. Awesome stuff indeed. Anyway, let's talk about stealth. Prototype has some of it. It's a key part of gameplay, at least for a while. And of course, as it usually is with Prototype, it's extremely rudimentary. All enemies work on line of sight mechanic, so if you move behind something, or prevent line of sight in the first place, you're completely invisible. Breaking line of sight is often extremely easy, and all it takes is just going around the corner, while preventing line of sight can be done with obstacles. This is actually pretty useful when trying to stealth consume enemies and bases. Since Alex is so strong, he can push trucks and boxes by just running into them, and if you put a box between an observer and your target, you can stealth consume them with no problems. The only issue is that it's slow, which means it's boring. So you'll only do this when trying to max out armor and weapon skills. It's bearable because stealth isn't used often, but at the same time it's infuriating, as with little more development, stealth in Prototype could have easily been breathtaking and incredibly deep. You could build a fantastic game around just the ability to consume enemies and take on their likeness and memories, but in Prototype, it's such a shallow mechanic you have to break the flow of the game to use it as it was intended. In fact, even when game is intended to be played stealthily, there's often a faster and easier solution. Human enemies in Prototype are blind and have a memory span of about 10 seconds. You can consume a soldier while another soldier is looking straight at you doing it, but because you started the animation while he was turned away, He won't react now that he sees you literally absorb his buddy. So even if game intends you to sneak into a compound and stealth consume a target to progress the mission unseen, it's almost always faster to go in guns blazing. For example, in this mission Alex has to infiltrate an enemy base and consume a commander to progress the mission. Game doesn't directly say it, but Alex himself expresses the fact this place is a fortress. There are hundreds of enemies and tanks, as well as infection detectors, that will reveal Alex if he stays in the vicinity long enough. It's implied we should stealth into the base, find the commander, somehow stealth consume him, then get out without alerting the enemies. But instead, I jumped in, ran towards the commander, grabbed him, ran around the corner, consumed him, then ran out without getting shot even once in the span of about 20 seconds. Oh, and I made a detour to get a collectible on my way. Also, that was on hard mode. Forcing myself to use stealth instead would make this mission significantly more boring and would take multiple minutes. So choosing between high-octane fast and efficient action for 20 seconds and multiple minutes of boredom is easy. So Prototype is a game of choice between really fun, high intensity but extremely limited action, or slow, a lot more boring but considerably more varied gameplay. It applies to stealth, it applies to mission flow, but it's extremely obvious in combat and powers. During the game you gain evolution points that you can later spend to unlock abilities. You get evolution points for basically everything, completing missions, defeating enemies, finding collectibles, etc. And with how many upgrades there are, you'll definitely have your work cut out for you trying to decide what and when to get. Abilities are Prototype's bread and butter, the very key of the entire game. And to nobody's surprise, powers and abilities are completely messed up. There are 5 main powers: claws, muscle mass, whip fist, hammer fist, and the blade. Each power has a few unlockable skills, plus there are a few devastators and several generic abilities Alex can use. At the first glance this seems awesome. Prototype, an intense action-heavy game with lots of abilities and powers. It must have lots of tactical options and offer really rich and enjoyable range of combat, right? Wrong. There are only 2 powers in the game. Well, 2.5. The blade, muscle mass, and very, very rarely whip fist. The moment you get the blade, hammer fist and claws become irrelevant. Claws are fast and can kill regular infected and normal soldiers easily, but so can every other ability in the game. Against bigger and stronger enemies, however, claws deal incredibly little damage, and not a single enemy in the game will just stand there and let you attack them multiple times. They either attack back or evade, so claws are only used on the very first playthrough because they're the first power you unlock, and around the time you get them enemies are still very weak. Hammer Fist are the exact opposite. They deal solid damage to everything in a small radius around the impact point, and can even stagger some enemies, but they are really slow, and for maximum damage you have to charge the attacks, which makes Hammer Fist even slower. Literally the only advantage Hammer Fists have is the ability to engage enemies from afar with Hammer Toss ability, but even then at full charge and dropping from a skyscraper, Hammer Fist is unable to destroy a tank in one hit even on medium difficulty, while the blade can one-shot a tank even on hard, and is considerably easier to aim and use, so there's basically never a reason to use Hammer Fist. In the second part of the game, most of the significant enemies have either knockback and interrupt charging, or simply deal too much damage to allow yourself to get hit while charging the attacks, so weak and slow powers are completely irrelevant. The blade meanwhile deals much more damage than even Hammer Fist, is significantly faster, and can also be charged for even more damage, so instead having to hit hunters with 6 or 7 fully charged Hammer Fist attacks, you can completely destroy them with 2 or 3 blade attacks. And it also staggers enemies when fully charged. It's the perfect weapon. When it comes to Whip Fist, some players like to use it to clear out crowds of small enemies, but it's basically pointless most of the time. Infected enemies mostly attack with melee, so automatically run to Alex into close combat range. So Whip Fist extended range doesn't matter since you can just slash everyone up close with the blade, and Whip Fist damage output is so low it doesn't matter when fighting bigger enemies, so you don't use it then either. And besides, blade isn't even a static power. Alex moves quite a bit when he's attacking with the blade, covering decent amount of ground with every attack combo, so limited range is definitely a non-issue for blade fights. The only two uses for Whip Fist after getting the blade are either catching targets at range, which is pretty difficult even at the best of times because of unreliable targeting, or to fight or hijack helicopters midair, which is fun but can also be accomplished by other means. In regular fight, Blade is the best option all the time, every time. There is no situation where Blade doesn't get the job done in the most efficient way possible, and it works on all regular enemies as well as most of the bosses. There's literally no point in trying anything else, since Blade is always the absolutely best option. Air Slice is a Blade-specific move that will destroy most tanks and hunters in a single attack, has somewhat decent area of effect, and can be executed incredibly fast considering Prototype's insane movement mechanics and dashing, and it's always effective. There will never be a situation where Air Slice can't solve your problem, so you use the blade all the time, Whip Fist sometimes, and Muscle Mass when fighting bosses, since most bosses deal too much damage up close, and the only actual way to defeating them is either getting into helicopter and spamming rockets for a few seconds before it's destroyed, or picking up cars, trucks, and other objects and throwing them at the boss with Muscle Mass. Hammer Fists and Claws are literally never used, except if you want to make your life harder and slower and deliberately use them, or if you switch to them by mistake. Same applies to Devastators. These are the super attacks you can perform when you've got critical mass. There are 3 Devastators in the game: Tendril Barrage, Ground Spike Graveyard, and Critical Pain. With Tendrils and Critical Pain also having an air version, Critical Pain deals the most damage of all abilities in the entire game, but it's easily the least useful Devastator of them all, especially since you basically never fight single enemies. Ground Spike Graveyard and Tendril Barrage are incredibly easy to perform, deal immense damage to large area, and are hard to avoid. Oh, and they don't need a target lock-on. Critical Pain meanwhile deals stupid amount of damage, but is hard to perform, damages a single target, and everything in the path between Alex and said target requires a lock-on to be used effectively, has pretty limited range, and is quite unreliable, as sometimes enemies will simply dodge it. Even knowing Critical Pain deals the most damage, absolute majority of players will almost never bother with it, especially considering the atrocious targeting system, and will just spam Tendrils and Graveyard non-stop to achieve basically the same result with considerably less effort. But the greatest abilities Prototype has to offer aren't Devastators, nor are they tied to one of the 5 powers. Best abilities are the general combat stuff, in particular Cannonball and Flying Kick. Cannonball is an amazing move, deals very decent amount of damage to both helicopters and ground targets, is really easy to execute, has decent range, and is cheap to unlock. An amazing ability, but it pales in comparison to Flying Kick. It's easily the best ability in the entire game, and most players won't even think to use it most of the time. Flying Kick can be used to quickly catch up to locked-on targets, inflicts decent amount of damage to helicopters, so you can literally just kick choppers out of the sky, which is metal as heck. You can kick people and then surf on their bodies, which is also really awesome. But most importantly, the kick can be cancelled into a grab mid-flight, which means you can lock onto a tank or helicopter, air kick, then grab the target when you get there and hijack it. Or you can target an enemy and grab him, or use it to escape death. The ability to cancel kick into a grab is probably the most overpowered thing in the entire game, and not only is it extremely helpful in later stages of the game where you'll be swarmed by tanks and helicopters basically in every mission, it also makes Whip Fist almost entirely pointless. You can use kick while having blade equipped, so you can grab targets or hijack armor without having to switch to whip, with blade being the strongest weapon in the game, and flying kick offering the same perks as Whip Fist. That along with shield makes it easily the best ability combo in the entire game, applicable in every single situation against every single enemy. Flying kick and cannonball can even be used together to extend your range while in the air, since both moves can be used one after another, and both moves propel Alex a decent distance. In certain missions there are so many helicopters that using kick, kick grab, and cannonball, you can spend good 10 to 15 minutes without even touching the ground, just jumping from helicopter to helicopter, hijacking them and raining death from above on everything that moves. The main drawback of Blade, Kick, Cannonball, and regular shield combo is that this particular set is so absurdly good in literally every situation, and coincidentally is also probably the easiest ability set to learn, that it makes like 80% of all other abilities almost entirely pointless. Sunrise, Sunset. When Alex is not using abilities, he's using equipment, and that's where Prototype really starts to shine, though not without drawbacks either. Regular guns are pretty boring and quite weak, but as introductory weapons that's what they're meant to do. Assault rifles and machine guns are only effective against humans and are hopeless against anything above normal pedestrian infected. Regular soldiers die from a single shot regardless of difficulty, so they're not a threat, but Super Soldier and Hunters got simply too much health to be dealt with by guns. Machine gun at least comes with a very respectable amount of ammo, so you can keep shooting for a very long time. It actually gets boring faster than it runs out of ammo. Rocket launcher is so-so, it deals somewhat decent damage, and the rockets track targets, but the ammo capacity is limited and fire rate is pretty low, so it's only useful sometimes. On easy and medium rocket launcher is fine, but on hard, enemies deal so much damage that even getting hit once or twice is a real problem, so very often there's simply not enough time to use rocket launcher. The grenade launcher, though, is excellent. It deals adequate amount of damage for the amount of ammo it has. Rate of fire is very decent, and it even has area of effect. All around excellent weapon. The only drawback is that grenade launcher is quite a rare weapon to find, and in the chaos of the moment you aren't looking for handheld weapons. But on those rare occasions you do actually find the grenade launcher. It's a real joy to use. The really fun part are the vehicles. Prototype has 3 types of armored vehicles and 2 types of helicopters you can use, and all of them are excellent. The tank is based on M1 Abrams, deals excellent damage to basically everything, has solid amount of HP and comes with plenty of ammo. IPC is weaker, but it's still pretty damn solid against everything that moves, with the only drawback being overall lower damage output than regular tank. Thermobaric tank can be used in one mission, and it's a thing of beauty. Damage it deals is almost nuclear, durability is sky high, and it's endless fun for all of 2 minutes you'll be using it. All these armored vehicles are awesome, and the best part is, the handling and speed are excellent too. While in some other games armored vehicles are slow and cumbersome, in Prototype they're as agile as possible while still offering precise and extremely easy movement. And don't slow down for anything. In a tank, you can go right through a horde of enemies, over cars, obstacles, and everything else in your path. The only thing that can slow a tank is a hunter or hydra smashing into you. Helicopters are even better than tanks. Not only are they infinitely more mobile because they're in the air, they also seemingly deal more damage. And while the transport helicopter is not too exciting, only having 2 types of rockets, they're almost exclusively encountered in missions and thus don't feature in the game enough to get boring. The gunships, though, are literally everywhere after like the first hour of the game, and that's where most of the vehicular excellence lies. Gunships have a chain gun and 2 types of rockets, regular unguided missiles and seeker rockets, and both of them are amazing. While chain gun is somewhat weak and unimpressive, seeker rockets deal massive damage to everything, even the bosses, but they require lock-on. In some of the hardest missions, seeker rockets are simply godsend, as you can just hide behind the corner and shoot rockets at the target from relative safety. And developers probably knew that would happen, so to limit exploitation, seeker rockets have very low ammo, so you can't just camp forever and cheese every target. They might be the most balanced defense in Prototype. Regular rockets also deal solid damage, can be spammed really quickly, and each gunship holds a very decent amount of ammo, so there's never a reason to hold back and you can just go mental, destroying everything in sight. But they don't seek targets and simply just destroy indiscriminately. And if you do run out of ammo, you can simply jump out and hijack another gunship in the air to continue the frenzy of death, which always feels pretty badass. The only problem with gunships is limited durability, and especially later in the game certain enemies get ranged attacks that can destroy your helicopter really fast. But it's a very minor problem. In fact, gunships are so incredibly good, they're often the absolutely best solution to every problem. It's the Blade problem again. Incredible damage output, self-guiding rockets, absolute freedom of movement, and almost guaranteed safety provided by hide means there's literally never a disadvantage in using gunships. So after a while gameplay can become somewhat stale, since you're up above everything, somewhat detached from all the action and just rain death from far away on everything that moves. Gunships are so good that after 3 or 4 playthroughs, I was basically forcing myself not to use helicopters at every opportunity, and instead either use tanks or just defeat everything with abilities. Helicopters are literally suffering from success. Use of armored vehicles and helicopters is further increased by the fact any vehicle seems to get more durable and deal more damage when driven by Alex. It's hard to say whether that's exactly what happens, but a tank driven by Alex can easily survive multiple direct hits from other tanks, even on highest difficulty, while tanks driven by NPCs will explode from 2 or 3 shots max. Same applies to helicopters, where one piloted by Alex can survive 2 or 3 hits from self-guided rockets, while NPC helicopters go down after getting hit by just one. Of course, almost never will you fight just one tank or just one helicopter, so NPCs make up for their apparent weakness by sheer numbers, and Alex is almost always at a disadvantage, but using the vehicles still feels incredibly powerful, and the sheer abundance of them around every corner makes it really hard to resist the temptation to just grab a gunship or tank and plow through everything. It almost feels like vehicles came from some different game entirely. Almost everything in Prototype has a downside, is underdeveloped, badly implemented, or just wrong. But vehicles are so right, it's a very stark contrast with everything else, with literally the only downside being the fact they're so overly good they make game boring. But overall, vehicles and especially gunships are easily one of the highlights of Prototype. Which brings us finally to the reason why we're doing all of this. The story. Prototype's story is pretty interesting, but it's also pretty convoluted, and there's a lot of information missing even during the main storyline, as the game heavily relies on Alex finding and consuming all targets of intrigue to see the full picture, which is a thing most people probably want to. So here's the summarized version. Prototype starts with a classic 2000s cliche game intro, Amnesia. For some reason, back then it was really popular to start the game by having your character not remember anything. Anyway, the entire game starts by Alex waking up in a morgue during an autopsy, and from this point onward the entire game is all about making Alex remember what happened and punishing those responsible. And a lot of people die, tens of thousands. Alex proceeds to escape the morgue, which is actually located in Gentek building, which will be important later. He gets noticed while escaping and gets executed by firing squad. However, Alex doesn't die, he just gets slightly injured. Making a run for it, Alex jumps over pretty high wall, noticing how easy it was to do. This is where player gets the first taste of Alex's speed and power by running along the street, blowing up a helicopter by throwing a car at it, and running up the walls. After destroying all enemies, Alex manages to escape, but collapses in an alleyway where he is found and shot by Blackwatch soldier. Yet again, however, he survives and consumes the soldier, in turn learning of his ability to consume living organisms and take on their memories, abilities, and appearance. Consuming a Blackwatch officer, Alex gains memories of his sister, Dana, and goes to her apartment, which is guarded by Blackwatch. Using disguise, Alex manages to infiltrate the building just in time to save Dana from getting abducted by Blackwatch. They escape the Blackwatch blockade, and we learn at the moment she knows very little of what's going on, as her and Alex have been basically estranged for half a decade, until very recently when Alex contacted her with a request to gain information about Gentek, the creators of Blacklight virus, the same virus that gave Alex his powers. But she does provide Alex with the little bit of information she managed to learn thus far, involving Gentek, its director Macmillan, and few other details. Dana also shows Alex where he lives, so Alex goes there in hopes of finding some answers. At his apartment, Alex has a few revelations. Particularly important is his memories of Karen Parker, his ex-girlfriend. However, Alex doesn't have much time to reflect, as his apartment was under surveillance by Blackwatch and was booby-trapped with bombs, which are detonated and Alex is blown out of the window. The agent responsible for explosion tries to escape by armored vehicle, and soldiers arrive to slow Alex down. Alex is forced to kill everyone and gives chase, catching up to agent and ends up consuming him. After this bloody affair, Alex returns to Dana, who has hacked into Gentek and discovered information about a woman named Elizabeth Green, who is contained at Gentek building in Manhattan, the same building Alex just recently escaped. Alex immediately goes there and infiltrates the building, and finds Green, discovering that she's the source of infection throughout the building. Green escapes Gentek, awakening special infected known as Hunters as she does so and unleashing the virus on the city. Alex is thrown out of the building again, but manages to survive the fall, followed closely by Hunters. Consuming nearby officer, Alex learns of a military base nearby and lures the Hunters there to deal with them, where with the assistance of soldiers he eventually kills and consumes the Hunters, obtaining the ability to use claws. Heading to Dana once again, she tells Alex she has found his ex-girlfriend, Karen Parker, who also worked at Gentek and was allegedly hunted by military. Alex goes to Karen's safe house, but discovers it's right next to an active infected hive, and Karen can't escape. To save Karen, Alex infiltrates a military base nearby to consume a tank commander, and by doing so obtains knowledge required to operate tanks and armored transport vehicles. Using the armored transport he takes from the base, Alex destroys the hive near Karen's apartment to reduce threat to Karen from the threat of both infected and Blackwatch and transports her to a new safe house far away from chaos. With Karen's help, Alex discovers there are 2 strains of the infection, but she needs more genetic material to study to determine exactly what's happening. First, she needs genetic material from infected water towers that are actually hunter incubators, and then she needs fresh material straight from the hive, so Alex goes to gather the required materials. Gathering genetic material from water towers is easy. All Alex needs to do is destroy the towers. But gathering material from the hive is harder, as the hive constantly throws out genetic material orbs, but is also under constant attack by military. So Alex has to fight military to protect the hive until he has gathered enough material. Ultimately, he collects enough material for Karen to study. After doing that, Alex learns that military has deployed an aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan in close proximity to Manhattan Island to use as a secure forward base, and is using a new viral detector technology to detect infected people. Since Alex is one of the key infected targets on the island, when he visited Dana he left a trail that these new detectors pick up, so Alex has to race against time to destroy all military groups before they discover the location of his sister. While Alex is busy with that, Blackwatch covertly quarantine the whole island of Manhattan, cutting off all bridges and tunnels in attempt to contain the infection on the island. Blackwatch also deploys stationary viral detectors all over the area in hopes of finding Alex, so he is forced to destroy them to protect his and Dana's location. With that done, Alex goes back to Karen Parker for more information on infection, but she claims she still doesn't have enough genetic material and needs Alex to get some from inside the hive. Alex doesn't know it at this time, but Karen has actually betrayed him to Blackwatch, and all of this is just a ruse to get him trapped. Karen secretly sent Alex's DNA to Gentek, and using that, they were able to develop a pathogen capable of destroying the infection and robbing Alex of most of his powers. This pathogen is given to Captain Cross, an elite Blackwatch soldier, to inject into Alex when he has a chance. When Karen sent Alex to the hive, she actually just sent him into an ambush by Blackwatch, so Cross could inject Alex with the pathogen, which he manages to do, despite Alex killing many of his soldiers. The pathogen severely restricts Alex's abilities and will kill him for good if not removed in quick fashion. Meanwhile, Dana discovers that in 1969 government tested a predecessor to Blacklight virus called Red Light in a small town of Hope, Idaho. This outbreak left a sole survivor, Elizabeth Green. Alex wants to find out more, but he has to find a way to deal with the pathogen first. He goes to morgue operated by Bradley Ragland, a doctor who worked in Gentek for a while, but left because he didn't want to work on bioweapons for Blackwatch. Ragland is one of the very few allies Alex ever gets, and he also wants to stop the Blacklight virus. In order for him to do anything, he needs to inspect the victims from Penn Station, location of the first Blacklight outbreak in Manhattan. Alex finds out the location where bodies are kept, and despite suffering heavily from the parasitic pathogen, he helps transport Ragland to an abandoned military base where Patient Zero bodies are located. While they're there, infected attack, and because Alex can't use his powers, he has to rely on military equipment to protect himself and Ragland. Ragland is behind protective glass, but it will be broken if unprotected, so Alex is forced to use rifles, machine guns, rocket launchers, and grenade launchers scattered about to destroy all the enemies and keep the attention of infected on himself. With massive effort from Alex, they manage to survive long enough, and Ragland gathers enough genetic material to produce an anti-pathogen, which which, if Alex injects it into the correct hunter and then consumes it, should cure him of his parasitic pathogen. This is not as straightforward as Alex would hope, though, as the hunter needs to be of a very specific genetic type and not just some random infected. First, Alex needs a helicopter equipped with viral scanner to find the necessary hunter, so he consumes an aircraft pilot, gaining the ability to use helicopters in the process. With the ability to pilot helicopters unlocked, Alex flies out into Manhattan to look for suitable target for infection. After finding and injecting the hunter with a cure, Alex gives a few moments for antibodies to the pathogen to build up within the hunter and then consumes the hunter, not only gaining all of his previous powers back, but also unlocking full body armor and the blade, his most powerful weapon, in the process. Now fully powered, Alex returns to Dana, but the reunion doesn't last long, as they immediately get attacked by a new enemy, the leader hunter, sent by Elizabeth Green, who kidnaps Dana. Alex gives chase, but the leader manages to escape. Alex needs help finding Dana, so he goes to Ragland again, who explains the role of leader hunter and insists on Alex consuming one to obtain the knowledge it has. Alex then proceeds to fight infected through the city, finding and confronting another leader hunter and attempts to consume him, but is unable to. Instead, he lures him to the same abandoned base where he and Ragland were previously, and after long and hard fight manages to knock him out. He returns to Ragland, who explains that leader hunters actually have 2 brains and 2 spinal columns, hence why they're extremely resistant to Alex's attempts to consume them. Alex will need to break both backs to force leader hunter to enter recovery state. Only then he will be able to consume them. Ragland claims this dual spine mutation is Blacklight's evolution attempt in order to adapt to Alex's own abilities. With this new insight, Alex returns to the military base, and this time is able to beat and consume the leader hunter. This gives Alex ability to see infected organisms. All infected with Blacklight are connected to a hive mind, sharing information and knowledge between various hosts. So Alex uses his new infected vision to find people connected to the hive mind, and by consuming these people, Alex can strengthen his own connection to hive mind, eventually learning the location of the leader hunter that kidnapped Dana. By defeating and consuming this leader hunter, Alex can learn where Dana is located, so that's exactly what he does. By consuming leader hunter, he learns Dana is kept in armored core hive nearby, which is an impenetrable fortress that no regular armor can break through. This is when Alex decides to exploit Blackwatch for his own ends and use their thermobaric tank, a weapon of incredible destructive power, the only way to break through the armored core hive. Thermobaric tank will eventually reach the armored hive, but it has to destroy few lesser hives on its way there, and infected attack it all the time, so Alex is forced to protect the thermobaric tank in order to eventually save Dana. His efforts result in thermobaric tank destroying multiple hives, but eventually a new enemy appears, a Hydra that disables thermobaric tank's crew, so Alex has to drive it himself. And that's where the most destructive 2 or so minutes of the game take place, with Alex driving the thermobaric tank and, if player chooses so, destroying literally everything in his path with incredible force. After a brief but very destructive drive, Alex reaches the armored core hive, which doesn't stand a chance against thermobaric tank. Breaking through the wall, Alex enters the hive and is confronted by Elizabeth Green, who has made this armored hive her central base. After a brief exchange of words, Alex manages to infect Elizabeth Green with the same Blacklight pathogen that he himself was infected by Cross. Alex hoped this parasitic pathogen would cure her of her infection like it did with him, but Elizabeth Green is special, and her biology rejected the parasite, instead ejecting all the infected biomass that immediately creates a new form of life, the Supreme Hunter. This new infected is extremely aggressive and incredibly powerful, and is in fact the most powerful hunter in the entire game. It immediately attacks Alex, and even has some of the same powers as him, like the increased speed, massively increased durability, and ground spike. It also can summon other infected, which makes this already pretty hard fight even harder. In addition to that, Supreme Hunter actually can block most of Alex's close range attacks, so fighting from afar is the only effective option. Alex does manage to defeat the Hunter after a long, intense fight, then finds Dana and escapes the armored hive, but Supreme Hunter isn't dead yet, and quickly rebuilds himself. But now Alex has more pressing matters. He takes unconscious Dana to Ragland, who promises to take care of her and provides Alex with some new information regarding Blackwatch's new plans for Manhattan. So Alex leaves to deal with this new threat. Alex then gets contacted by unknown person, claiming to have vital information. This is where the truth about everything gets revealed. 40 years ago, Blackwatch came to Hope, Idaho, trying to develop a new bioweapon. It was called Red Light, and at first, Blackwatch tried it on animals, but nothing happened. Then suddenly, it rose up, infected and consumed the entire town. It found the perfect biological host in Elizabeth Green, which is why she was the only survivor of the outbreak. Government tried to contain the outbreak, so they completely wiped the town off the map. They then gave a strain of Red Light from Hope to Gentech and had them work on it. Gentech called it Blacklight and tried to engineer a super virus that could manipulate genetic traits of living organisms and be able to rewrite genetic code. Also, it is revealed that Alex in fact is not human, but the physical manifestation of Blacklight virus. Blacklight consumes and rewrites genetics, and it just so happened to consume genetic code of Alex Mercer and manifest itself into him. So Alex isn't person, he's just a Blacklight virus that thinks itself to be a human, named Alex Mercer. It's also revealed that Blackwatch are planning to deploy a weapon against him using aircraft. Alex doesn't like that plan, so he aims to change it. He needs to infiltrate the main military base to gain more information, but in order to do that discreetly, he needs to help out military a bit. During the mission, Alex also finds out Blackwatch deployed new super soldiers to the field, genetically engineered to counteract viral targets. These super soldiers are highly mobile, super strong, extremely resilient to damage, and can easily fight even the strongest infected on equal grounds. They're a completely new threat to Alex and are the strongest living weapon humanity can deploy to destroy Alex. Alex does eventually manage to infiltrate the military base, where he learns Blackwatch are about to cover entire Manhattan with a cloud of poison called blood tox, called so due to its coloration. This poison destroys Blacklight virus but is completely immune to regular humans, and Blackwatch plans to completely eradicate the infection across the city with this poison. Because they've been pumping blood tox into the room from the very start, Alex gets found out quickly and has to escape the base, which he manages to do after fighting off waves of both regular enemies and super soldiers. After escaping, Alex fights across the city to destroy blood tox blowers before they destroy him, which he eventually succeeds at. That leaves only one location where blood tox remains. But before Alex can destroy it, anonymous contact calls again and informs Alex that the Blacklight infection went underground in response to blood tox deployment and has been amassing there in preparation to subsume the entire city, with most infection concentrated underground below Times Square. Alex disguises himself as Blackwatch officer and assists in deployment of blood tox pumper as it travels to Times Square to deploy blood tox underground. There's a heavy resistance from all forms of infection, from regular infected to Hydras, but with combined forces of Blackwatch and Alex, blood tox pump reaches Times Square in good condition and deploys the blood tox. This attracts even more attention from infected, and they attack, with Alex and military forced to defend the blood tox pump. After waves and waves of infected that Alex and military manage to defend against, enough of the poison gets deployed that it forces Elizabeth Green, now an amalgam of infected biomass, to emerge from underground, destroying the blood tox pump, and give Alex one last fight to determine the true ultimate life form. As enormously powerful as Elizabeth Green is, eventually she does get defeated, and Alex consumes her for all the knowledge she holds. With blood tox pump destroyed, Blackwatch loses all hope of curing the city of infection, and instead they pull their forces off the island, preparing to simply nuke the entire city and get rid of infection that way. Alex knows now his time is running out, but he still needs to find McMullen, as he holds all the answers to all the questions, so Alex needs to act fast. However, McMullen is in hiding after almost getting caught by Alex earlier, so he's not that easy to reach. Because of his exposure to blood tox and his inherent rapid mutation, Alex now has a slight immunity to blood tox. Anonymous contact suggests Alex to attack blood tox facility, then pretend to be defeated so he could be delivered straight to McMullen, as McMullen wouldn't pass such a great opportunity to study Alex, the Blacklight incarnate himself. The plan works, and after all-out assault on blood tox facility, Alex successfully feigns defeat and gets transported straight to McMullen.
He's new neutralized. You know the drill. I want this in the storage unit 10 minutes ago. Bring in the bird. We're moving this to the director. Now!
Hi, boss. That is a...
That's where another crucial piece of information gets revealed. It was Alex Mercer himself that deployed Blacklight. Alex worked in Gentech on Blacklight virus, then tried to escape with a sample of it. He failed and was cornered at Penn Station. Knowing he'd probably die anyway, Alex smashed the vial of Blacklight and released the virus onto New York. He was immediately gunned down, but Blacklight entered his body and found a perfect host within, so it consumed Alex's genetic code, recreating an exact copy of his body, just without his memories. McMullen claims to know the secrets of Hope, Idaho 2, but before he says anything else, he shoots himself. Now Alex is but one last straw to grasp at. He goes to meet with the anonymous caller, which is revealed to be Captain Cross. Unlike most other Blackwatch, Cross actually felt emotional regret for his actions as Blackwatch officer and was sympathetic to citizens of Manhattan. When Blackwatch proposed nuking Manhattan as the last resort in case Blacklight couldn't be contained, Cross decided to work against them and foil their plans. Being a high-ranking Blackwatch officer, however, he couldn't oppose them directly, so instead he used Alex, supplying him with information and directing him in struggle against Blackwatch. It was him that was feeding Alex information about Bloodtox, Elizabeth Green, and everything else. But after Elizabeth Green destroyed Bloodtox pump and Blackwatch gave evacuation order to pull its personnel off of Manhattan Island, Cross faced off against rebuilt Supreme Hunter and was consumed, with Supreme Hunter inheriting all Cross's memories, abilities, and his form. So this Cross Alex is talking to is actually just Supreme Hunter, who feels the same hate for Blackwatch General Randall that original Cross did, because he inherited his thoughts and emotions. But Alex doesn't know that, not yet. Supreme Hunter Cross realizes he can't get to Randall, as Randall is on an aircraft carrier near Manhattan, and the only way to get to him is to find Colonel Ian Taggart, who's responsible for the loss of Blackwatch's base on the island. It was Taggart that ordered nuking of the city, and it was him that pulled military forces off the island. Randall only planned to glass the city as the absolute last resort, but Taggart panicked and ordered the nuking prematurely. While Cross was still alive, Randall himself ordered Cross to bring Taggart in, but Cross was consumed before he could do so. Supreme Hunter, however, gained this information by consuming Cross and decided it was the best way to gain access to aircraft carrier and Randall himself. Taggart plans to escape Manhattan by helicopter, but he hides his exact location and uses few decoy helicopters to guarantee his safety. So the only option Alex has now is to destroy every single helicopter trying to leave the city. Alex destroys all the helicopters, but it turns out it was an attempt by Taggart to misdirect Alex, and he's actually still on the island. Instead of flying away, Taggart shows his cowardly side as he tries to escape on land by driving a thermobaric tank and throwing all of his forces at Alex to try and slow him down. But nothing can stop Alex. He destroys Taggart's base, forcing him to flee. At this point, Alex is almost at the absolute peak of power. Nothing can protect Taggart now. Not men, not weapons, not armor. Giving chase, Alex just cuts through every man and tank Taggart has. Eventually, at the base of Brooklyn Bridge, Alex catches up to Taggart, breaks into the tank, and consumes him, ending his cowardly existence for good. And now, there's just one person left. Randall, the source of it all, the one man that was there at the inception of red light and black light, the one person who's at the center of all this mess. He's the only one left, and he dies tonight. Alex assumes the form of Taggart, and Cross calls for extraction to USS Ronald Reagan. To Randall, immediately upon arrival, Randall shoots Taggart in the head. Of course, he doesn't know Taggart is actually Alex in disguise, so Alex survives the gunshot. Randall shows off his nuke to Cross, but is confronted by Alex in his own skin now. And this is where all the pieces fall into place, where all the answers are revealed. Finally, Alex learns the truth. In 1960s, Blackwatch were trying to develop a new viral bioweapon that could target specific races based on their genetic markers. They named this virus Red Light. They first tested it on animals, but results were inconclusive. So they made a deal with the government and created an artificial town of Hope in Idaho. They filled the town with a cross-section of ethnicities and backgrounds. The cover story was that it was an experiment to test self-sufficiency of small towns in case of nuclear war. But secretly, they just wanted to test out Red Light on human population. The virus was disguised as harmless substance simulating fallout and was spread through the population of the town, who all eagerly participated in the tests, basically rolling up the sleeves for researchers to inject them with the substance. In total, 461 people were injected with Red Light. For 998 days, the virus had no effect on population. But then, Elizabeth Green's strain of Red Light suddenly went rampant and took over the entire town, transforming it into one giant hive and turning people into mindless slaves, protecting Elizabeth, as she just so happened to be the ideal host for Red Light, and virus was protecting itself from harm. The following year, Blackwatch started small war in town, destroying everyone that opposed them. Local government covered up the event as a local cult going rampant. During the war, Blackwatch captured Elizabeth Green, the only survivor, who was just 19 at the time. But even then, Red Light threatened to spread out of Hope and into neighboring towns. Fearing that military wouldn't be able to contain Red Light for long, higher-ups ordered then Lieutenant Randall to wipe the town off the map, so they glassed Hope with nukes, eradicating Red Light almost entirely. But Elizabeth Green was captured, and thus survived the explosion. Elizabeth was unique, as while other infected turned into mindless berserkers, her body accepted Red Light virus, and even produced a new strains of the virus, as well as giving her superhuman abilities and making her the leader of Hive Mind. But that's not all there is. Apparently, at the time of her capture by Randall and Blackwatch, Elizabeth was actually pregnant. When the child, later called Pariah, was delivered, Randall was present at the scene and tried to take the newborn child with him. In her rage, Elizabeth bit his arm. Randall, who knew the risks of Red Light virus, chopped his own arm off to stop the spread of infection. Elizabeth and her child Pariah were taken by Blackwatch and locked up to be tested and experimented on. Pariah was considered the ultimate life form on Earth, the perfect incarnation for Blacklight virus, and was locked up in some remote base in California as part of Project Crusade, while Elizabeth was taken to a different Blackwatch base. Almost 10 years later, she was given to McMullen, director of brand new research organization called Gentek, to continue experiments with gene manipulation. Eventually, Gentek would move Elizabeth to their building on Manhattan Island for study in Project Blacklight. That's where Alex Mercer shows up. He, along with Karen Parker and few other researchers, were hired by Gentek to research Red Light virus and modify it. For the next 10 years, Alex led Project Blacklight and was able to successfully synthesize a new viral strain, eventually also named Blacklight, but he was never told where the original Red Light came from. However, over time, he became suspicious of Gentek and their affiliations and started his own investigation into the origin of Red Light. He discovered that Elizabeth Green was locked up in the same facility he worked at for 10 years, and that she was the source of Red Light. Alex confronted McMullen about this, and that forced Blackwatch to label him as liability, even though McMullen tried to convince them otherwise. As he continued to investigate deeper and deeper, eventually Alex discovered exactly how Elizabeth Green was infected and what was the true nature of his work at Gentek. After learning that, Mercer escaped Gentek with a vial of Blacklight, but was cornered at Penn Station and released the virus into the city, infecting himself and everyone around him, and that's where the game started. While Alex is having all these revelations about true history of the virus, Cross blindsides and grabs him, exclaiming he would be able to survive the nuclear blast if he consumed Alex. He then throws Alex away and reveals his true form as Supreme Hunter. What follows is short but really intense fight between Alex, the Supreme Hunter, and Blackwatch soldiers. This time Supreme Hunter is significantly stronger. He is as fast as Alex, but can also block most of the attacks, can use tendril devastators, has more health, and is extraordinarily aggressive. Situation is not helped by the fact the nuke is about to explode in a few minutes, so Alex has very limited time to end the fight. But Alex is also on a completely different level now. He has full access to all abilities, has no reservations about anything, and is at absolute peak of his power. So eventually, Supreme Hunter goes down and Alex is victorious. But time's short and Alex decides to save Manhattan for himself by flying the nuke out into the Atlantic Ocean. With a few moments to spare, he drops the nuke into the water and tries to escape, but eventually is caught by the blast, his body destroyed by the nuclear heat. But he does survive. As a few strands of biomass, he floats back into Manhattan, where he absorbs an unlucky crow and is able to rebuild himself. Not as a human, but something more. The first of his kind. The ultimate life form, a true prototype. So there you have it, a story of Prototype. A convoluted mess at the best of times, especially if you skip targets of intrigue or don't watch cutscenes, which could be a lot of people, but it is definitely epic as hell, with a lot of plot twists, unexpected outcomes, and secrets within secrets. Have to admit, even I didn't know the full story until I started to write the script. Despite having something like 400 hours in Prototype and having beaten it at least 30 times, the story is decent, but the way it's told is mediocre. There's always some big secret left untold, there's always something else to every event, and there's always stuff left unexplained. It almost feels like Prototype is trying to pull some Lost kind of twist, and for the most part, it succeeds, but only if you're paying attention to stuff shown and said. But Prototype is not about story, it's all about visceral carnage, so story is secondary at best, non-existent at worst. I should note that like half the story didn't come from the game. Most of the Elizabeth Green's backstory comes either from a 6-part comic released along with the game, or knowing the expanded story from Prototype 2 as well. Pariah and Project Crusade are almost entirely absent from Prototype, only being mentioned like twice. Elizabeth's story is also told, but with considerably less details. While comics reveal how Elizabeth got into Hope and what happened next and actually make her look just like an unfortunate woman who was in the wrong place at a wrong time, in the game she's portrayed almost like an absolute monster with few redeeming qualities, almost like Alex Mercer himself. But most players won't care about that. It's an orgy of violence, absolute carnage, and indiscriminate destruction. And this is easily the one aspect of gameplay where Prototype eclipses every other game ever made. Even the sequel, Prototype, doesn't require you to think. The story doesn't matter. The circumstances of the events don't change anything. The whole goal of Prototype is to inflict as much damage to everything and everyone as you can. Everything is hyper-violent. Every move is exaggerated to maximize the impact. Every person you destroy is almost 99% blood and like 1% clothes, and bones don't exist. The world is just a liquid, and Alex is the shark moving through it at maximum ferocity, and nothing is allowed to compromise that absolute feeling of force. There have been other games released before and since that feature one or few aspects of the absolute carnage of Prototype. Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal also allow the player to control an absolute hardcore badass that rips and tears through everything, using heavily destructive equipment to bask in guts and blood of his enemies. But the world is still and boring. Environments are varied, but players' interaction with them is minimal. Walls can't be destroyed. There are no cars to crush or explode. You can't just plow through the level in a tank. And while it's fun shooting enemies and ripping their parts out, the game works within the bounds of first-person shooter, which means there's only so much action you can cram into the screen at any time. And with Doom being an intense action FPS, most of the time you're just following the crosshair and looking for new targets or items to collect, instead of basking in all the violence you cause. This is why glory kills are so impactful. Those few seconds of gore animation is the extent of visceral violence in Doom games. Prototype is like a glory kill, just all the time and whenever you want it. Another game series that comes somewhat close to what Prototype can offer is Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. Shadow of Mordor specifically gets all the violence just right, with massive battles at close range and from afar, dozens of enemies at once, and extremely satisfying kills, improved immensely by perfectly timed slow motion. Shadow of War adds more fluff, like upgradable weapons and more abilities, but at their core, both games offer a good amount of carnage and violent behavior. But both of these games are very limited. They both have to work within believable bounds of a fantasy world, in this case Lord of the Rings. It's a world that follows realistic rules with a dash of fantasy elements. As violent these games are and as good as the combat is, it is forced to always follow the limitations imposed by their setting. You can't have characters destroying entire armies in a second with a single attack. You can't have unlimited violence whenever you go. You have to look for it. Prototype is not limited by these constraints. constraints. It's not based on any pre-existing setting. It has no limits on physics or reality. It can be whatever it wants whenever it wants. And that's why it's so perfect. There simply isn't any other game in the world that offers the same feeling of absolute, uncompromising power as Prototype does. Even Prototype 2, where the main character canonically is stronger than Alex Mercer, is too overencumbered by mechanics and limitations that make it less of a chaos fiesta and more of a chore to play. Alex Mercer is simply too perfectly balanced for the game. He's just so right. He's fast enough for the size of the city, but not too fast. He can jump as high as you need to, but not so high that it breaks immersion. He's strong enough to defeat everything, but not invincible, so there's always a challenge, and difficulty is preserved regardless of how you play and what you chose to do. Some call Prototype a difficult game. I don't think it's hard. It's balanced towards a very limited amount of abilities and powers, but all of them are excellent and involve certain amount of skill, so it's never tiring to use them, and there's always an opportunity to get better. Easy is considerably easier than normal, which is easier than hard. But every difficulty is balanced well enough that when you play it, you don't breeze past everything, but also aren't challenged so hard it feels unfair. Every action you do depends entirely on your own skill and intuition. Every mistake made can be recovered from, and every enemy you encounter can be easy or hard to deal with, depending on your immersion in the game. I'm always playing on hard, not because I think the game is too easy, but because hard is perfectly balanced for my skill level. It provides the most satisfaction when I defeat an enemy that could have easily defeated me. And when I do get defeated, it doesn't feel unfair. It feels like I could have won but wasted my chance because of my own shortcomings. Prototype feels almost like a relic from some another time where games were raw and unapologetic. There's no microtransactions, no loot boxes, no ranking systems, no multiplayer. Nothing is allowed to distract you from complete and total immersion. There's no deeper message attached to it. It's not a game about gender dynamics. It doesn't comment on the political situation in the world. There's not even a hint about pay gap or gender inequality. Nobody cares about your sexuality or who you identify as. It isn't restricted by bounds of pre-existing franchise. There's nothing here that requires you to know the lore or to be a follower of a particular series. Nobody judges you for who you are or what you think or what you do. You're just absolutely free. Free to let all the pent-up aggression and rage out. Free to destroy with no limits. Free to annihilate everything that stands in your way. It's simple and efficient. It's a perfect balance. Alex Mercer is the perfect character, and despite all the flaws that it has, of which there are so many, Prototype is just the perfect game. There's nothing else like it, and probably won't ever be again, so just enjoy it.